I watched Louis Theroux's recent documentary speaking about the rise of toxic masculinity, and it was so revealing. Regardless of how you feel about that space, it's very hard to watch that and not see the disconnect, the incongruence with what many of the influencers are saying and how they are living their lives. And that is the beauty of it. There's something about integrity that is just so beautiful. Because it's one thing to be consistent, to be whole in your worldview, to speak what you feel, but then if you are behaving in a way and saying things that are not consistent with that, that's where the cookie crumbles. And integrity has to do with wholeness, soundness, moral soundness. Interestingly enough, I remember there was a year not that long ago where integrity was the most looked up word on Google, and I think that was because most people just don't know what it is. It deals with, think about it. It comes from the word integer, whole, right? The idea is that when you have wholeness, when you have soundness, you're consistent in the way that you think, in the way that you act, the way that you are. And the most beautiful expose was watching what some of these influencers were saying. People like Myron, who on one hand is speaking about how he does whatever he wants with his girl, right? This is one of the themes I think you find within the toxic masculine culture. And I don't even like using the word toxic masculine because they're just individuals, male and female, that are toxic, right? That has nothing to do with it being a masculine thing. Masculinity is inherently a good thing, and so is femininity. But it's when people are behaving toxically that is just universally bad. In the same way that if I went to the Bronx and I saw a bunch of people popping caps in people's asses, right, and they happen to be melanated, I wouldn't say, hey, that's toxic blasculinity. That's just toxic, right? Well, anyway, I digress. So, on one hand, you see people like Myron that are advocating for these relationships that are not, in the contemporary sense, they're one-way monogamous relationships, right? And I don't have an issue with that. If everyone's on board, is transparent, and they're cool with it, good for them. But on one hand, he's maintaining that basically, I think he said something to the effect that his girlfriend packs his condoms when he goes traveling or something like that, and he pays for her bills, that kind of stuff. And she's completely on board with everything that he does in terms of being with multiple women. At least that's what he's saying. And then when push comes to shove and this girl is being pushed by Louis Theroux on whether she's comfortable with this whole dynamic, you can see if you read in between the lines that she really is not. And that there's definitely a disconnect at play here. And that's the lack of integrity, I think, that is showing in this space. And I think, where is there certain characters? I want to be very clear. Like, for instance, Justin Waller, I found he had a very consistent theme in the way that he would act. He was trying to be on board with everything, that look, and I think he was honest about his situation, and his wife clearly was, and his attitude, the way that he looks at the dynamic, that's perfectly fine. He has this attitude where he doesn't want to be tied down. It works for him. He's quite happy to be in a non-monogamous relationship. And his attitude towards women is such that he absolutely loves them and respects them. I think one of the themes that is presented by some of these people that are very much against what you see in the space is that these people hate women. And many of them don't. I think many of them have just had a lot of issue with the contemporary dynamic you see within relationships. The idea of getting married, tying yourself to one woman, and then being in a situation where legally a woman can basically take everything from you, and they don't want to be caught up in that space. And each to their own. There's some people that have that dynamic and it works for them, others that don't. That's not the criticism at play here. I guess the criticism is more the influences like HS Tiki Taki, whatever it's called, one of these guys that is clearly just trying to defraud people. I think that was very, very evident in his disingenuous behavior, and is also honest in the fact that he's basically saying that, look, he's doing all of this for money. He doesn't care. But on one hand, he's saying that, but he's also doing things that are trying to take, I guess this is where people have an issue with what he's doing. They're clearly preying on innocent people that look at what he's doing as something that is going to work in their life. They're inspired by it. They go out and they invest their money in these people. You know, they get caught up in their investment schemes, and then they find out this shit is not what it's cracked up to be. You know, but I do find this guy's content to be very interesting. Not saying I support it, but I guess there's something about someone that's willing to speak their mind and not care about the backlash. I think there is a part of you that finds that at least amusing. And when you're watching these influencers from the mindset that this is entertainment, it's one thing, but when you're watching these influencers and believing in their bullshit, and many of them speak about how, on one hand, they completely don't support what they're doing. They don't support OnlyFans. They don't support this objectification right of women, but they're essentially trying to fund them. And that's where you see the disconnect. That's where you see the lack of integrity at play. And what I also found very revealing was in the documentary, there's a very critical moment where Louis Theroux was questioned by HS Tikitaki, you know, how do you feel about, do you believe Israel is committing a genocide, that whole thing, and basically dead silence. And it kind of shows, on one hand, that this guy is speaking about how he's so transparent, willing to expose the truth and what's going on in media, but can't say things that would be obvious to many of us, right? So obviously this guy is restricted by what he can say, and there's an element of a disconnect, of lacking of integrity there as well. But overall, I found the documentary to be very revealing. Of course, it was a shame that the kingpin of toxic masculinity, Andrew Tate, wasn't able to make an appearance, but from what I understand, he said he had some issue with the fact that he wasn't being paid for it, and thought that Louis Theroux was too insignificant to show up. But it gives you an insight into the mindset that Andrew Tate has. But in any event, let us know in the comments below what you thought of the documentary. Peace!